Let's start our program, and we are an informal family. Really, really thrilled to have everybody with us. I'll introduce myself. My name is Nancy Schiffman. For those of you who don't know, I'm the Associate Executive Director of Development and Signature Programs at the Stanford JCC, and Tzahal Shalom is most certainly one of our signature programs. Tzahal has a great history. 43 years in the making. That is an incredible, incredible comment on the love and passion that our community has for Israel. And so for 43 years, we have invited IDF soldiers, officers, wounded veterans at the beginning to active duty service men and women to the reserves in the last few years as regulations have altered with the IDF. And still the vibrancy, the impact, and the magic that is Tzahal continues to inspire our community. We have hundreds and thousands of kids over the last 43 years in public schools, private schools, middle schools, high schools, colleges, faculty, learn from our incredibly brave and courageous young men and women year after year. And of course, our local Jewish community gets to benefit from hearing what's happening in Israel to kind of deepen their connection. And of course, every year our host families adopt another member into their families with our officers. And it's really a thrilling program. And if anybody knows of anyone who would be interested in hosting, it is a JCC program. And in this particular program is open for JCC members who want to host. It's a privilege of membership. So if you know of anyone who's a JCC member who would like to host, we'd love to consider for next spring, as we would love to have our extended family come back to us. Zoom is a wonderful thing, and we're delighted that we have this opportunity, but we're hoping next year to have people in person. And for today, I want to introduce two very, very extraordinarily special folks. For those of you who already know Or Berger, or served as a JCC Israeli Shaliach many years ago, a few years ago already, it's been 6 years to 3 years, right? It's been 3 years since you've been in the in the JCC building. But his legacy is strong and kicking, in our hearts and in our minds. So we're thrilled to have him back to kind of be the moderator today of an extraordinary conversation that we're going to be having with Shahed Igal. Shahed is a journalist from I-24 News in Israel. He was also earmarked to join us last spring for our JCC Tzahal Shalom program to be hosted in our community. And unfortunately, we had to pivot to a different programming, to our virtual programming. And we're just thrilled that he has offered up his time and his experience to share with us regarding news from Israel. So with that, I am going to turn the floor over to Shahed Igal and Or Berger, who will give us what's happening, hot off the press, so to speak, what's happening in Israel. And please feel free, there will be a lot of opportunity for answering questions. And at that point, you could likely take yourself off speaker and ask the question. We are, as I said, an informal, intimate group. So it's great to hear from you all, to hear what you have to say. And I want to thank you for joining us. So with that, I give you Or and Shahed. Israel in the news.
Nancy, thank you so much for the introduction. You just did my job very easy. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Or Berger. I was the Stanford Shaliach for 2 years. I'm currently 29 years old. When I arrived at Stanford, I was 22. So you got my best years, apparently. For those of you who don't know me or do not recognize me with a beard on, I served for 2 years, and since then I moved back to Israel. I'm currently working on my master's in politics. I study public participation, civil participation in the U.S. and Israel. and everything about the U.S.-Israeli relations. A word about that, I didn't know what I wanted to do when I grew up. And then I arrived at Stanford and spent 2 years there. And since then, I've pursued a career, an academic career, and a professional career in understanding relationships between people and between countries. And soon, actually this August, I'll be moving back, at least for a couple of years, to the Stanford area. We'll start in New York. I'm actually moving back as a married man. I'm married to Rachel Eisman, Jennifer Eisman's daughter, for those of you who remember Jen from working at the JCC. Just a word about Karen, a big heart back to you. And that was my ring, by the way. I am very happy to introduce to you Shaked Igal. He'll say more about himself, but I just wanna tell you, Shaked, that everyone at Stanford looks forward every year for the Tzahal Shalom delegation, for the officers who come and enter the hearts and homes of members of the community. And it is a bummer that we can't have this conversation, in person at the JCC. And but I just want to make sure that you tell a little bit about yourself, your IDF service, and of course the question that every Jewish mom in attendance wants to know: are you single? Those are important questions to our members here. So please check in.
Okay. First of all, thank you everyone for having me. This is a very exciting moment and event for me to join you today. I think it's amazing. On the one hand, the pandemic and the coronavirus has changed our lives significantly. But on the other hand, we get to do things like this now very often. It seems like these kind of conferences and meetings online are happening a lot. So I'm very thrilled to be here. So thank you all for organizing and having me here. So I'll introduce myself first, and then we'll get to the point. So my name is Shaked Igal. I'm 25 years old. Originally, I was born in the north part of Israel, in the city of Haifa. Then I grew up in the lower Galilee area, just nearby the Sea of Galilee. I grew up in a very small village. I think you can say it's 2.5 hours away from Tel Aviv, so it's very, very far away. And as a kid, as a child, it was amazing to live in such an remote area. But obviously, when I grew up, I started being more curious about things that are happening around me and wanted to be a part of more things. So I started studying in Haifa. I did my high school in Haifa. I joined the Hebrew Rally School. It's one of the biggest high schools in the country. And it's very important to say it's a very big part of my identity, is that I grew up in an area which is very mixed. In North Israel, 75% of the population is Arab, Christian Arabs, Muslim Arabs, Jews, Bedouins, many kinds of Arabs and Jewish people. And unlike the, what people may think when they hear Jews, Arab, Muslims, it's actually a lovely area. It's actually a place where coexistence is not a bad word. On the contrary, it's actually an amazing area to live. And I think that as a citizen of Israel and as a human being in this world, I learned so much about peace and about coexistence when I grew up in this amazing area. And I think the biggest gift I got from growing up back then up north is the Arabic, because I studied Arabic. I had Arabic friends. I went to buy hummus every Friday in the village nearby. So it was really amazing for me to start learning a new language. I love languages, so it's kind of obvious that I'll be interested in knowing the language that is being spoken right next to me. So I think it's one of the most significant parts of my life. After graduating from high school, I joined the IDF, obviously. I had no idea where I'm going. I just joined the IDF. They said intelligence. I knew nothing more, which is nothing new for lots of Israelis joining the army. I did a very long course of 6 months, just learning Arabic. In Arabic, you have the spoken Arabic and you have the written Arabic. When you study Arabic in Israel, you study the written Arabic. That means that you can read a newspaper, watch the news, but you can't really have a conversation with an Arab person, because this is some kind of a different language. It's very similar, but it's very different at the same time. So during that time, I learned actually how to communicate in Arabic and do more things in Arabic. I finished that course, and then I joined a special unit in the intelligence forces. In the total, I had 6 years in the IDF in the same unit. I went to the officer course, I became an officer, and then served at the same unit, and I was the commander of more than 15 people in my team, which was an amazing experience. And I think I became who I am because of the army. I think it contributes a lot of and taught me a lot about life, about how to become a better person, and how to be better in general. I think the IDF is the best school. And that's about me. Today, I work at I24 News. Like Nancy said, I'm a journalist, I'm a producer in I24 News. Just before I was about to go to Stanford and join the Tzahal Shalom program, I actually got an interview at I24 News. And when the pandemic started to hit the world, I understood that things are going to change. But somehow, I think I'm the only man or the only person in the world that actually could get a job when the pandemic started. So as soon as the coronavirus pandemic started, I joined I24 News. So my mom says all the time that in Hebrew it sounds better, but in every bad thing there's also a positive and good thing. So here we are. So I've been working in I24 News since then. It's been a year and more than a year now. At my job, I'm mostly looking for stories. I'm in charge of all of the I24 News guests. That means that I choose who is coming to which show. For example, if tonight we're going to speak about the tensions on the Gaza border, so I choose who we will be talking to. I'm reaching out to people, and that's very exciting. I love people. I love stories. I love speaking to people, and I think it's the most amazing opportunity for me to do that, to speak to people. And I'm also in charge of the stories of the rundown. We call it the rundown. It's the order of the show and the content, obviously. I also write for I24 News website. Of course, I do this all in English. I24 News is divided to 3 channels. There's the Arabic channel, there's the French channel, and there's the English channel. I also work in the Arabic channel a little bit, just because it's very fun and I love the Arabic channel. It's very different, but it's amazing. In general, it's a very, very, very interesting workplace. I think there's more than 50 nationalities in the building right now, of people working here from all over the world: Europe, Australia, of course, North America, United States, Canada. So it's a really great opportunity to meet people and to hear more about the world. And that's it, or I give you the spotlight.
There is a lot happening in Israel right now. You were talking about the Gaza border, and we also have this political fiasco and 4 elections in 2 years and the COVID, and there's a lot to touch upon. And I just wanted to tell our audience, feel free to unmute yourself and interrupt us at any time. This should be as informal as possible. We're here at your service. We'll have a conversation and talk about the things that are important to us. But if we miss anything, please let us know, and we're more than happy to touch upon anything. Just direct the conversation to whatever direction you see fit. I wanted to ask you, Shaked. So I worked in radio for many years. So I also did journalism before and after my time in Stanford. What was it like for you to be a journalist during a pandemic?
It's a very good question. I think that the answer will surprise many people because when you say pandemic, you obviously think about bad implications and how the world became closed and how you can't actually meet people and you're restricted. But actually, I think the phenomenon of Zoom and the opportunity to actually meet people on Zoom and feel great about it made journalism much better, because now I can speak to many people all over the world. Zoom is everywhere. As you have internet, you have Zoom. It's very easy to reach out to people, to speak to people. Unlike before, when Zoom was something very complicated, very hard. Some people had Skype, some not. So on the technical field, it's way easier. And I also think that as humanity, many stories that usually we weren't really expecting hearing are happening. Very odd stories all over the world. So I think it's actually been a very interesting year. But let's see, the future is coming, and pandemic seems to not going anywhere. So
as we like to say in Israel, the future is now.
the future is
what's like one story from the past year that or like one memory that you're gonna hold dear and take with you?
Okay, so as you know, I'll first speak about one big event that changed the Middle East, and then I'll speak about the story. So the Abraham Accords, obviously, I think everyone here are familiar with that event. Back in September, was signed in the White House. That amazing peace deal that was signed between Israel, the United Arab Emirates, and Bahrain, and then expanded to be signed with Sudan and with Morocco. Maybe some more countries in the future, in the near future. It's unknown. And I think the way Israeli media that interacts with the Middle East, like I-24 News, there's always local media and there's local story always, but for me it was always so interesting to understand what's going on in the bigger neighborhood, in surrounding countries. And I-24 News is actually a very good platform to hear stories that are happening in the Middle East and not just in Israel. And since then, the channel became an influencer and reached out to many platforms, media platforms, and organization and people all over the Middle East. I have many friends in the UAE. I think after the US, which I know many people in the US, and I also have relatives in the US, the second country where I have the most friends that is not Israel is the UAE. Wasn't expecting to say something like that a year ago, but it's amazing. And I took part in the program of this channel to reach out and be actually a good media platform for viewers, foreign viewers like Americans and Europeans living in the UAE, and also the UAE residents that are watching the Arabic channel. And I think the whole normalization thing started to spark many questions all over the world. Who's next? The moment the UAE signed, it was who's next, and then it was Bahrain, and then it was Sudan, and then it was Morocco. And that question, I think, it's the main question that is being asked today. And this is my personal mission here in the channel, to understand who's next. So there's many theories. There's you know, you can speak to many people that will say different things. I tried once to investigate and started to actually look around and see what's going on and who might be the next country normalizing ties. And I tried Pakistan. Why? I don't know. I just had the feeling that Pakistan might be the country, the next country. Pakistan is a very far country. Many Israelis, I think, don't even know where Pakistan is. It just sounds like many other countries: Afghanistan, Pakistan, Azerbaijan. Many Israelis, I think, are not really familiar with this country. And I started looking, and I reached out to some kind of a political refugee from Pakistan, and I started talking to him. Apparently, he's a big fan of Israel. I had no idea. It was very surprising to me. I was expecting a very hostile reaction from him, but it was the opposite, which very surprised me. And we spoke about it, and then we spoke about his life as a refugee. And apparently, he was a minister in the Pakistani government, a previous lots of years ago. He's very connected there today, but as you know, Pakistan is a very complicated country. It's not really a democracy. Many human rights in Pakistan are being violated on a daily basis. Of course, of refugees and political refugees, obviously they're escaped and can really come back. And I raised that question. I told him, do you think Pakistan might be the next country to normalize ties with Israel? And during our work, our research, to find that, we reached out to many sources in Pakistan and outside of Pakistan, and we realized that a secret delegation from Pakistan visited Israel in the past year. We even got the flight number. They came, and we published that story. And in Israel, it wasn't really big news. I don't think many people in Israel heard about it. But in Pakistan, it was the top news of the month. The whole newspapers, the whole television channels, everyone spoke about that, revealing that Pakistan reached out to Israel and tried to normalize ties with the help of the Saudis. And that was our exclusive that time. I think it was one of the most amazing things I ever got to do. And let's see. Now, right now, it's really in the dark, but that's a very interesting story I had to tell.
Absolutely, and it's you know, the follow-up would be amazing, right? Because I mean, we talk about Indonesia being a possibility. You know, we heard of Saudi Arabia being a possible next country. Pakistan is definitely on that list, but it's pretty niche, I would say. You know, it's not the first country you think of.
That's true, and you know, as we see in the Middle East, the obvious is not necessarily the truth. No one expected the UAE will be the first. We figured maybe Morocco, maybe Sudan, that had a very clear interest in normalizing the ties. But I think when you research and when you try to find what's the next thing in the Middle East, you have to look at the geopolitical map and understand what is going on right now in that map. Of course, the US administration has a key role in this whole thing. And right now the administration changed. And of course, it has a significant impact on the Middle East and on any coming deals in the Middle East. And it's true. Many people are very curious, for example, about Saudi Arabia and when it will be the time for Saudi Arabia to normalize ties. And many people said and I'm not getting political. It's just what many people said, that as soon as Joe Biden will become US president, no normalization. That's it. It's over. It was Trump era. We're over. Biden administration cares about different issues. It's not on the table. And I think on the opposite, actually. I think that Biden administration is very hard on Turkey, for example. So Saudi Arabia might actually normalize ties with Israel in order to show that it's a key role and a major player in the Middle East, that it's willing to make compromises in order to help the stability of the region, and to prove to Biden's administration that Saudi Arabia is in the game, and it's not against the current administration. So many theories. That's my sorry. That's my personal take. But yes.
Yeah, that is as political as we'll get, I think, in this conversation. Will you say a word about? You're talking about this has only indirect effect about Israel, but the new American administration and Erdogan and Turkey with yesterday's development. Will you say a word about that?
I think it's historic. I just spoke with an Armenian friend of mine. She's a journalist. I asked her to join us today for one of our programs. And then I thought it would be really interesting to set up a debate between an Armenian guest and a Turkish guest. And let's speak about the Armenian genocide. And then she told me something very interesting that actually made me stop my usual day work and think. She told me, why would I be discussing if any event in history happened or didn't happen? Because as you know, Turkey is denying its own involvement in the Armenian genocide. While the Armenians are very happy that finally the US has agreed to recognize the genocide. Also, Israel had many years avoided recognizing the genocide because of the strong ties with the Turkish government. Ties right now are not very strong. It used to be a few years ago. Right now, it's not. So she told me, that journalist, that she's not willing to sit with a Turkish that might be saying that this is not true, that this is a distortion of the truth. And then I thought, wait, would I or any of my relatives will be discussing if the Holocaust was real, was not real? Of course, denialism and denying the Holocaust is one of the major problems we have as Jewish people all over the world that we need to face right now. It's a major problem for Jewish communities all over the world, and I get it. I think it's amazing to see how the world is very different but very alike in many areas, and it was a very interesting. But beside that, I think that the new U.S. administration policy in the Middle East proves that it's more based on values and actual policy, and less on I would say personal relations. Yes, I would say that we can say that this administration cares more about values and what it wants to promote in the Middle East, which is peace, obviously. And the last administration had different things in mind. That's what I think.
Cool. I'm just going to take this conversation to my world for a second and say that recent studies have shown that democracies in the world are diminishing. And you know what Churchill said about democracy, of how it's the worst possible, it's the worst government except all the other ones we've tried so far. And nowadays there is a decline in the number of people living under a democracy in the world, and there is a very sharp rise in what we call electoral autocracies, as you see in Russia, as you see in India, as you see, it's not really an electoral, but even Saudi Arabia. These are all countries that have one, even Iran, have one big figure, like one big, that one usually guy who's kind of leading everything, and then the public kind of does whatever the public does. But you have that one big figure, and I think that Trump's strengths played well into that field. That's why I think he had an easier time communicating with MBS in Saudi Arabia, why he did have an easier time communicating his agenda to the Middle East. But that's just from a purely academic point of view.
No, it's a very interesting insight.
I was wondering. I just want to take us back to just for a second to journalism. When you write a piece, or when you're about to publish something, do you think about the potential readers you have at the Emirates, or broader? Like who do you believe your audience is, and how do you change your text or your approach accordingly?
Of course. So, yes, when you start writing, or when you conduct even an interview, or you conduct a television program, the first thing you need to think about is who's going to watch. Obviously, the channel, most of the viewers of the channels are Jewish, from North America and Europe. This is the English channel, and obviously the Arabic channel it has a totally different audience. I think when it comes for today, I think our main focus, because this Abrahamic Accords became such a real change in the region. You can see I was in Dubai last December, and I could actually hear, yes, I was sent by the channel, and I could hear Hebrew in the streets. It's crazy. I was shocked. I was really, really shocked. It was amazing to actually hear Hebrew in the streets of Dubai. I never dared to imagine that kind of thing. And it's not just tourism, it's business. And if you're in Israel and you open your Instagram or your Facebook, you immediately see sponsored ads from Abu Dhabi investment office, and come invest your money in Dubai, and come work in Dubai, and come study and educate yourself in Dubai. So it's a really game changer also in Israeli business. And I think that one of the most important focuses right now in my journalism and in my writing is that people are curious about the UAE. They want to invest in the UAE. They want to explore and see what the UAE and Bahrain and other countries has to offer. So it's some kind of a triangle. It's the US, which is the heart of the classic viewer, I would say, the typical viewer, Israel, and the UAE, and I always try to make it relevant for all three. When of course business, tourism, and culture, I think it's one of the most interesting topics to actually expand right now.
So speaking of culture, you're walking down the streets of Dubai, speaking Hebrew, I assume, with your friends, or going into a restaurant, the waiter asks you, "Where are you from?" And you say, "Israel." How does that feel? And did you feel any? Did you feel welcome everywhere you go? Did you feel any hostility? Hostile. That's the word.
Hostility. Yeah, it's when I was in Dubai, I felt welcome. I felt so welcome, especially by the local people that I met, and I had connections before, and I got to actually meet them when I came there. And the thing about Dubai is that I think 80% more, I think 90% of the residents of Dubai are not Emiratis. They're not originally from Dubai. It's foreign people, which, Europeans and Americans, and we know them. But Dubai is also some kind of a center for the Arabs all over the Middle East. There's Lebanese, there's Syrians, Egyptians, so many Egyptians, Jordanians, people from Saudi Arabia, from Kuwait, from Bahrain, from Iran. So it was amazing. If anyone goes to Dubai in the near future, I highly recommend going to somewhere called Global Village. It's some kind of a market they built there, which shows each culture in the world. There's really sections from all over the world and actual people that come there and have their own market. You have the Turkish market, you have the Greek, you have the Saudi, you have the Kuwaiti, and there I had the most amazing experience. I walked into the Iranian one, and I spoke to someone. I bought some kind of sweets. I'm not sure what it was. And then he asked me where am I from? He spoke Arabic because I think he lives there for a long, and I spoke to him in Arabic, and my accent was a bit weird to him. So he asked me, and I said Israel, and then he said, it was like, oh, okay, which is, it's new to them too. And I had a really nice conversation with him, and I think it was the first time I got to actually speak with Iranian guy who has family in Iran, and it was amazing. We had a normal conversation. We spoke about Israel, we spoke about Iran, we spoke about Dubai, and I think it's kind of the symbol of this accords. I think it really opened Israel to the world. It's not, in Arab countries, even saying the word Israel in many years was against the law. In Lebanon, if you communicate or you're texting or calling someone in Israel, you go to jail because they have a law against it. But in many countries, this accords actually opened Israel, and even in countries that didn't normalize yet or will never normalize, it's not necessarily such a taboo to communicate with Israelis, to know Israelis, to get interested. So that was my experience in Dubai, and I had the best time.
Phenomenal. And I just want to say that, out of all the names of all the accords so far, the Abraham Accords have the perfect name that fits perfectly what you just said. Abraham, the name Abraham Accords was actually chosen because Abraham is the father of the monotheistic religions. And so being that, Dubai being that platform for gathering of all of, sons of Abraham is really what I think this whole thing is about. And so I'm very moved to hear about your experience, and I hope to experience it myself soon enough. I would like to now move to our political situation in Israel. For the folks who don't know, this right now, Benjamin Netanyahu is trying to form a coalition in hopes of regaining or continuing to serve as our prime minister. In the past 2 years, Israel surpassed Italy as the most unstable democracy in the world. That is one record that Israelis are not proud of. They're usually pretty good at breaking good records, but this one is really not our proudest. I just want to say a word, just take 2 minutes and elaborate about the system itself, some of the differences between our system and the American presidential system, and then I would like to hear from you, Shakid, about how you see things happening and how we might exit this baffling situation. So when we go and vote, it's nothing like the American system. So I've seen your Shakid. I don't know if you saw the grocery list that Americans get when they need to when they vote, because they vote for the school board and court and also the president. In Israel, you go and you vote. You have one slip that you put in an envelope, and you vote for a party. You don't vote for a person. So when you hear in the media that Benjamin Netanyahu is going opposed blank, Benny Gantz or whoever that may be, that is a little that misrepresents reality, because it's really the Likud going against the Likud headed by Netanyahu is going against all the other parties. We have over 30 parties traditionally running in order to be elected among the 120 seats we have in the Knesset. Knesset is our parliament. We only have one house, right? So we don't have the House and the Congress, the House and the Senate. We have one house called the Knesset, 120 people in it. And the game, after the votes come in, the person who gets more than half, which is 61 votes, is prime minister. I'm absolutely oversimplifying it, but trust me, you don't want me to not oversimplify it because there's a lot going on. What happened in the past 4 times? Now we're on the 4th attempt. Is that votes came in and no one was able to get those 61 votes. The 2 very interesting facts, and that I really want you guys to know, is that the majority of Israelis are right-wing. We know that. We've known that for years now, and we're only getting, it only gets more clearer and clearer with every election that passes, and thankfully we have so many elections we can always look into it. So the majority of Israelis are right-wing. Also, the majority of Israelis don't want Netanyahu as prime minister. But when asked Netanyahu versus enter anyone's name, Netanyahu usually passes that person. But if you look at the 120 votes that we have in the Knesset, the majority of those votes are right-wing. The majority of those votes declare that they're not going to sit with or under Benjamin Netanyahu as in his coalition. So that is really the key to understanding the problem that we're at. Should Netanyahu resign? I don't know. He got the majority of the votes. His party, the Likud, is the largest party in Israel. It's not large enough to create a coalition by itself. And it doesn't have enough support among the other, they have 30 seats, more or less. So he needs 90 more seats, and he just doesn't have enough to get to 61. There are a lot of different things that we can get into if you're interested enough, but Shaked, I wanted to, you see how I turned you to American? It was Shaked when we started this thing, and now you're Shaked.
Shaked is perfect. I love them both.
So Shaked, how do you see the situation? How do you see us exiting this situation? What do you think that we should do?
Okay, I think, or explain perfectly how the system in Israel works. Thank you for doing that, because it was a big challenge for me to actually prepare and explaining how the system works. I think that the most important person in the game right now called Mansour Abbas. And we need to say a word first about Arab parties. In Israel, usually, when we speak about elections in Israel, we don't even mention the Arab parties, because usually they don't get into coalitions with the Zionist parties. Usually there's enough Zionist right-wing parties that can form a coalition together. In the past 10 years, it was Benjamin Netanyahu. Before it was different. But the cooperation in Israel was very clear until 2019. And as Or said, Benjamin Netanyahu can't actually form a coalition right now. So all eyes are on the Arab parties right now. And suddenly Israelis started to learn and know more about Arab parties. I have to say that me, myself, I didn't know a lot about Arab parties until it became such a game changer or kingmaker. And I said the name Mansour Abbas. Mansour Abbas is the leader of the smallest party in the Knesset, in the Israeli parliament right now. It's called Ra'am. This party is affiliated with the Islamic movement in Israel. It sounds very scary, but the Islamic movement has lots of parts all over the world. Also in Israel, it has the northern, it has the southern, and this party affiliated with the southern Islamic movement in Israel. Some will say that it's even connected with the Muslim Brotherhood that we know very well from Egypt and many other countries in the Middle East. And Mansour Abbas, before these elections, decided that it's splitting from the joint list of the Arabs. In 2015, all the Arab parties decided to join together a joint list, and it's called the Joint Arab List, to represent 20, I think maybe 25% of the population of Israel, which are Arabs. And he decided that it's just not working. The Israeli public is not willing to cooperate with the Arab politicians. It's lots of issues of trust and their stand on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And Mansour Abbas decided to take the focus and take the spotlight and to solve the burning issues and problems in the Arab society in Israel. Forget about the Israeli conflict right now. Forget about their problems in Gaza, in the West Bank, and focus on the problems of the citizens of Israel, the Arab citizens of Israel. Right now, I'm sure many heard there's a big problem in the Arab sector of violence and crimes. That I think it's the number one issue they want to fix and solve. And Mansour Abbas declared that he's willing to join any government that will commit to fix and help the Arab society in Israel, which is something it's never been happening in Israel before. We've seen, I think it was Yitzhak Rabin when he formed the government. He used the Arabs and he cooperated, but it wasn't really a game changer for the Arabs in Israel. And for the first time in history, I think the right wing in Israel, the biggest part of the right wing, is willing to cooperate with the Arabs. So everyone wants Mansour Abbas to be with their bloc, the anti-Netanyahu bloc and the Netanyahu bloc. And all said that the majority of Israelis are right wing. That's true, I agree. And I think also that there isn't really right and left really in Israel left. It's either Netanyahu or not Netanyahu. This is really the left and the right in Israel. It's not about the values. No one speaks, in the political campaigns, no one speaks about what's going on in the West Bank, how we're gonna make peace with Palestinians. Even the left wing is not focusing on that matter, really, because the thing is Netanyahu. It's many people support Netanyahu and say, look, he brought us 4 peace deals, the economy is thriving, everything is amazing. And some will say, this guy is corrupt, and he's responsible for many problems in Israel. So this is really the thing in Israel. And right now, it seems like, and I'm very careful in my words, because in Israel you never know what might happen, and you can love Netanyahu, you can hate Netanyahu. This guy is a political master. He is a genius. He always has some kind of a trick, some kind of a plan to get things right for him. Right now, it seems very bad for him. Right now, he does not have the 61. One of his allies that was supposed to form a government with him, Naftali Bennett, with his list, is actually looking at the other side and is willing to join what we call in Israel the change bloc, the bloc of party that is working for a change. And the main issue right now is to make everyone decide on everything, basically. Naftali Bennett, which is a very, very right wing that has people from the settlements and that is promoting a very right wing policies, needs to be seated next to Nitzan Horowitz from Meretz, the most leftist Zionist party in the Knesset, promotes peace with Palestinians, calls for a total separation between religious and the states and institutions in Israel. So it's very complicated to make these two people to sit together. And I think what's going on right now in Gaza, we see some kind of escalation, shows us how difficult it will be for any kind of such a mixed government to operate in Israel. Naftali Bennett, if he becomes the prime minister, needs to sit with Meretz and speak about how they're gonna handle Gaza. It's very complicated for these two sides to cooperate, but I think this is my estimation only, that the hate for Netanyahu will, make all the disputes go away, and they will probably have their 61. They will obviously need the help of Mansour Abbas and the Arab lists. It's very complicated. Everything has to go amazingly together, and let's see. No one really knows what it's going to be. I also think that in the Israeli politics system, a word from a politician before the elections and his word after the elections is totally different. Naftali Bennett said that he will not leave Netanyahu bloc, that he will do anything he can do to stay with the right-wing bloc. And right now he's working towards going the other bloc. And all the parties basically promise to promote different issues, and they will have to give up for a lot of their issues. So I think many Israelis really don't have a lot of expectation after four elections in 2 years, hearing the same promises again and again. But I think everyone, and this is a consensus in Israel, agree that the fifth election is not responsible, and it will cost billions of shekels to the country, and obviously no one wants to actually go to fifth election. So it's a plunter. It's a very hard game, but let's see.
You see how desperate times really do call for desperate measures. It's interesting. I would like someone in the audience to just remember. I would like to touch upon the different ways that we can actually solve this problem. There are a couple of different theories and things that people are trying to promote. Some are sillier than others. Some are actually realistic. Nancy, the answer is no. I see the question in the chat. Has voter turnout decreased? Interestingly, and Shaked, tell me if you have other information. I mean, you would expect that it would, right? Because despair after the third election, this is unsolvable. Why would we go out and vote? And that is traditionally, not even in Israel, not only in Israel, but globally, a bigger problem for the left than for the right. And so there's always this big scare among the left that voters will not go out and vote. I will not say Hillary. I will not say Hillary, but there are definitely some examples globally, but somehow voter turnouts only increased. I think that a part of it is Netanyahu being such a strong figure and causing so much emotion. Right now in Israel, you either love the guy or you think that he is a monster. And I clearly am not going to go into my interpretation, my own views, but I think that the idea that someone is at the center of the system to the extent, and maybe even greater than the system itself, is a situation that I don't like to see. And it has nothing to do with my views about Netanyahu specifically and his agenda. But I just wanted to say that, Shaked, before when I said that Trump could play to his strengths in the Middle East because of all those big figures, I said MBS and Ben Zayed, and how he could talk to Putin and Erdogan. I didn't say, but I think that Netanyahu is on that list. He's a huge figure, and he is in a way much bigger than the Israeli political system. And I think that we see proof of that in many different ways. But even before Netanyahu, even in the 90s when Netanyahu had his first reign, even before that, I think that left and right in Israel is those are funny terms to me, and I would like to explain to you guys why. When you think of the right wing, it's in the context of Israel, you think of not giving up territories for the Arabs, right? No, you're thinking about, or you're thinking about right wing, you're thinking about neoliberalism, right? You're thinking about capitalism versus socialism on the left, right? When you look at the list of right wing parties in Israel, you see Halikud, Netanyahu's party, which is a neoliberal party. I think Netanyahu will always, I think, should be remembered for the person, our really first prime minister who had a very solid neoliberal approach, which he, like it or not, promoted in its fullest in Israel. But when you look at his bloc, as Shaked said, and when you look at his coalition, you see Shas. Shas is an ultra-Orthodox Sephardic party. Shas will fight for welfare and for the country to raise taxes in order to give families that have many children secure income and more money the more kids you have. That is a socialist idea. That is a socialist approach. And so to call our right wing right was never true. One of the most right wing, in my opinion, one of our most right wing leaders ever was David Ben-Gurion. Ben-Gurion, the way he spoke about the odds of having some sort of a peace agreement with the Palestinians is something that you would expect from Netanyahu and right of him, and not from Nitzan Horowitz or the left members that Shaked mentioned before. And so I think that the whole idea of left and right in Israel is skewed. And I think that now with Netanyahu's great presence, even more so than ever. And it really is a question of yes Netanyahu, no Netanyahu, which really makes things a little more difficult. And when we think of that, and we have that in the back of our heads, when you think of the Arab parties, and let's say just for the sake of discussion that the Arabs are one unit, and they're clearly not. And we're going to get into that in a second. But when you think of them as one unit, it would make sense for them to be associated with the left, right? It will make more sense to them to be with those who support active negotiations with the Palestinians that would decide that doesn't. But if you think of the Bedouins in the Negev, if you think of families with 12, 13, 15, 20 kids and polygamy and a man having 4 wives and 20 children, then maybe his views, that person who has 4 wives, maybe his views are more aligned with Shas, the ultra-Orthodox Sephardic party, than with the super liberal lefty progressive movement in Israel. So why is it that the Arabs are associated with the left? I mean, historically they have been. Shaked mentioned Yitzhak Rabin. Absolutely, he absolutely tried to integrate them as much as he could. No one from the right did that. And the idea that Netanyahu, out of all people, will now be leaning on Mahmoud Abbas is mind-boggling and just makes this whole situation so much harder. And I just want to say one thing, and really what Mahmoud Abbas did is he said, like, I am not going to play the game that all of you have played for the past 73 years. I will look after my views, and maybe my views are more aligned with the right than the left, considering there's really no left or right in Israel. I'm sorry that this kind of became a monologue. I'm just going to do like a brief introduction to the Arab parties as a whole. Israel has a bar that went up over the years. So in order to get into the Knesset, you have to get more votes than right now. It's 3.25% of all the votes. All right,
the threshold.
So the threshold, exactly. So the threshold right now is 3.25. And when I was born in 1992, It was 1%. As Shaked mentioned, in 2015, they changed the law and made it harder for smaller parties to join, and raised it to 3.25, which made some parties merge. Actually, it made all the Arab parties merge. 4 parties, it's actually it's 3 Arab parties and the Communist Party merged into one that actually became the 3rd biggest party in Israel. So for the last number of elections, we had the Likud being number 1, the opposition being number 2, and then the Arabs being number 3 traditionally. It actually, we can also see it in research that when these merges happen, it revives it generates movement among the people. So it really powered up and mobilized the Arabs in Israel, which was very interesting. But what happened with that merge is that it made us think of the Arabs as one unit, where it really isn't. If you think of the Communist Party, you think of the leftist of the left. But among the Arabs, there are more than a few neoliberals, but they're sitting on the same party right now, representing arguably the same people. Same with political views, same with approach toward Israel. Some do not recognize Israel at all. Some actively try in some ways, ways and others to deploy sanctions and promote boycott of Israel from within the Israeli parliament, and some are closer and don't think about it as much. So Mahmoud Abbas's break out of that big Arab party is absolutely historical, as Shaked said, and it was just important for me to give you that point of reference, because this whole situation is going to affect Israel years and years to come. Shaked, I wanted to actually, is there any question from our audience? Anything that you'd like us to touch upon? I don't see. You can also write in the chat. You can also nap if you're interested. All good. So Shaked, how do we exit this?
Very, very easily. 5th election. It's very easy. I'm sorry, I just being sarcastic. This is the number 1 joke right now in Israel. I don't know. And anyone who will tell that he knows either lies or don't know, because it has to be some kind of a miracle to get out. But to be serious for a moment, 2 main scenarios. One, which seems to be the more likely scenario, is that the bloc of change will agree on certain issues, will agree to freeze certain policies and issues, and to form some kind of an emergency government that handles coronavirus, that handles the economy, that handles security, urgent topics that are a consensus in Israel, and no one does, handling the coronavirus widely is not something very controversial. You need to fight the coronavirus, and you need to take care of the economy. So this is, I think, likely to be happening. And the second thing is that Netanyahu will get certain politicians and certain members of Knesset from the right-wing party that are going towards the bloc of change, like Yamina and like Israel Beitenu, not the left parties, but the center-right parties that are willing to go to the left and take those politicians with him. It's something you can do in Israel. It's not recommended, and it's a violation of the promise made by the politicians to the people, but it's happened before, and I will not be surprised to see it happening again if Netanyahu will actually get 2 or 3 more politicians that are willing to go to the right-wing government, although the whole party is going to the other direction. I think this is the second scenario that might be happening. So,
cool. Nancy Schiffman's asking, what are the divisive issues? Nancy, you can unmute yourself and tell us what exactly you mean, because as you know, 2 Jews, 3 opinions. So divisive issues you can specify.
So you had made a comment about there are certain issues that are kind of like everyone agrees, like there whether you said some COVID, the handling of COVID, the economy. Maybe there are other things that are a little bit more like everyone kind of comes together. What are the issues that that people are talking about that either the camp of Netanyahu, expound versus the other camp? So that's kind of what my mind. I just wanted to hear kind of the highlights. Probably most of our audience knows the issues, but I felt that that was kind of an interesting talking point.
yeah, I think it might surprise, I think, many people, but I find the most decisive issue in Israel to be our law system. Right-wing governments are working for the last 3-4 years to change the law system in Israel. The right-wing think that the court has too much involvement in decisions. For example, the Knesset might pass a bill. For example, annexation. Let's say that Israel decides to annex parts of the West Bank, and in order to do so, it needs to legislate some kind of a bill. And then the High Court can come and say, hello, guys, it's very nice that you passed that bill, but it's not constitutional. It's not democratic, and I'm canceling your decision because I'm the High Court, and I'm allowed to. And this is a very simple way to explain, but many people in Israel find the High Court preventing right-wing policies to become a reality. When it comes to terror issues and when it comes to security matters and terrorists and the way the country handles many issues, right-wing policies are being blocked by the court. We see that a lot. While the left is more comfortable with the High Court being ruling in Israel in that way, and of course it's a matter of balance. I know that in the United States it works a little bit different, but in Israel the court has changed. The way the court interferes in democracy, in the government, in the Knesset changed during the years. I was in a lecture 2 months ago with Aaron Barak. He was one of the most amazing figures in the Israeli law system. He was a judge. I think that the most important judge in Israel's law history, and he's one of the figures that changed the system that made the court be so strong in Israel, and this is very decisive. So, for example, in the block of change right now, they're trying to decide who's going to be the Minister of Justice, and everyone wants to be in the Justice Ministry, because when you sit in that chair and you can influence how you elect the judges and how you can prevent court from doing whatnot. It's very controversial. So I think this is, I think you'll agree, this is one of the most decisive issues in Israel right now.
Absolutely, and actually for so many years now, because Aaron Barak, and I think we cannot stress this enough, is one of the most important figures in the history of Israel, and maybe the most important name you've never heard of. Aaron Barak was the chief justice of our Supreme Court judge and the head of the president of the Supreme Court in Israel, and he was the one who spearheaded what is now called the judicial revolution, or they give it all these big fancy names. He really, look, we have a problem in Israel. We have many problems in Israel. One of the problems we have in Israel is that we do not have a constitution. we have a list of rules that are called fundamental laws or basic laws. And in 1951, a Knesset member named Harari, they had this committee, and they said, we're gonna have these ongoing list of laws, and then one day will come and we'll gather them all into a constitution. Clearly, writing a constitution in a country like Israel is pretty hard because we're so heterogeneous. But so without specific rules, the question of what is unconstitutional becomes really hard when you don't have a constitution. And so the question of where the power of the Supreme Court stops and starts it's always up for debate. And it is, and Shaked said it wonderfully. The right is always trying to take more power, like give more power to the government, whereas the left is one pushing for more power for checks and balances, and having a legislative body and having a judicial body and having an operative body, and those being different. I think much like in the U.S. So absolutely. And we have a question in the chat from Dana Roth. Hi, Dana. How are you? Wouldn't you like to speak to us? Open your unmute yourself. Should I read the?
Hey, how are you? You can read my question. It's about. Oh, you want to just read it? If Netanyahu does not get reelected, do you worry about safety and security there? And do you think there'll be protests like we saw here with Trump? Like, are you concerned about that if that happens? Are Israelis concerned about that?
Or you wanna? I feel like you wanna answer this question.
Sorry, I don't know how long the answer would be. No, I'm not worried at all. I think that we are, it goes back to my problem with this one figure being bigger than the country. When Netanyahu is gone, and he will be gone eventually, I hope that he gets to an old age and serves as long as he gets enough votes to serve. But even when he's gone, we still have a very strong Shin Bet. We have a very strong Mossad. We have a very strong IDF. We have a weakened yet strong enough police. So I don't think that the presence of one person makes the effect that some people in our political system would like us to think. And going back to the idea of one person being bigger than the system, I think that I have plenty of criticisms, and now I'm really crossing the border here into my own full on my personal opinions. My biggest criticism of Trump was that he kept pushing himself away from the system. He kept presenting himself as someone who's not integrated into the system, but he has his own thing. And I think that is one core reason for why we saw the terrible footage we saw from Washington. And am I worried that something similar would happen in Israel? Absolutely. And that's one of the reasons why I think that no man or woman who's bigger than the system should affect the system.
I see that Wayne raised his hand. So Wayne, you want to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Okay. Like in the United States, the Supreme Court rarely makes major decisions in areas of defense because like they never say that a war is unconstitutional because it isn't declared. So I mean, that doesn't seem to be the same. That doesn't seem to be the same as in Israel. So could you address that, please?
Can you just repeat the last part of your question?
Well, the Supreme Court of the United States doesn't make too many decisions in the area of defense. And, but in Israel, the Supreme Court does seem to make decisions in the area of defense. So I was hoping you could address that.
Good.
You mean that in Israel it's more complicated to address security issues with the law system we have, if I follow it right? That's what you're asking.
Well, like you had mentioned, annexation, whether the
Okay. Yeah. So
yeah.
actually, in Israel, and because we don't have a constitution, it also has a different angle. This country had many security issues to confront all the years. And actually, when it comes to democracy in Israel, Israel is a very strong democracy, and I stand by that saying Israel is a strong democracy. But when it comes to security, Israel do not let, I think, the law to stand. I think we all heard about the ICC, the International Criminal Court, decision over Israel to investigate Israeli war crimes, if there's such a thing, which I'm not addressing, but Israel cares mostly about its security, and I don't remember any significant court saying do not go to a war, because one of the most important values of the law system in Israel is safety, and we have a fundamental we have a constitutional law called it has the meaning of honor, and one of the meanings of honor is being safe. So obviously, when it's balanced and going to a war or Israel doing actions to protect itself, I think the law is not really involved. But yes, when it comes to dealing with terrorists or with prisoners or with annexation is more difficult, and it's a very big question that I'm not sure that I'm the right person to, I'm not a constitutional lawyer, but
Maybe one day.
I think that maybe one day, maybe I might, I don't know. But yes, when it comes to these kind of things and reforms, it's very complicated. And yes, like I think we all saw American shows on the court, and the judge gets a notice: do not just stop talking and rule for the defense because it's a security matter and it's confidential. And the system here in Israel works kind of the same, and obviously security and law it contradicts itself many times. But yeah, I think when in Israel, when it comes to the law, and what the many right-wing people have with the law is that it cancels many decisions of the government. Not necessarily security. It might be religious. It might be some kind of racist decision. It's various things. Yep.
I just wanted to say that study law, so that's why.
Yes, I do.
I don't think it was mentioned, but I think it's worth knowing that Cheked studies law. That's just another fun about our friend. Torshens, would you like to unmute yourself? Hi, Sharon. Hi, Jeff.
Hi.
Hi. My question is, it's my understanding that the ultra-Orthodox wield a fair amount of power in Israel. And I was wondering if the Israeli people are concerned about that. Was that solely a function of the collaborations that are made to form the government? Is that an issue for the Israelis?
The ultra-Orthodox parties will not be a part of the next government. That's what your question is about.
Or their disproportionate power, I think.
Correct.
Proportion of power. Yes. Okay. That it's bigger than the actual number in the population.
Correct. And I'm curious, is that an issue for the general Israelis? And is that solely a function of the collaborations that will be made to form the next government?
I think so. Yes. I think if you see the campaigns of the parties, mostly the left wing parties, one of the most important issues for I think young Israelis is the religious state. I can't get on a bus on a Saturday and go to my grandma. I have to take my car, and I have a car, but many people don't have a car, or they have a problem, and it's kind of a it's a daily life problem, but it's many problems actually. If we want to get married, we have to go to the Rabbanut, and we have to do it by the religious. And many Israelis that are not very connected with the religion are very worried about their future. I think it's something my generation and old generation is cares a lot more than the previous generation. And yes, one of the problems, and I think the criticism over the ultra-Orthodox parties, that they care mostly about their interests, and that they have very strong and powerful demands from the government, when the actually amount of ultra-Orthodox people in Israel is much less. And I think it's a growing problem. And yes, it is, there's anti-Netanyahu and pro-Netanyahu. There's also parties that are not willing to sit together with ultra-Orthodox parties that are saying, no, we're a liberal party. We're not, we do not want to, there's many issues. There's also the IDF issues, and many ultra-Orthodox people do not go to the army. So obviously, I think it's a growing issue in Israel. And yes, absolutely. I think many Israelis are worried what is going to happen with the ultra-Orthodox parties. And I think many Israelis actually want to get rid of ultra-Orthodox parties and create a better and more liberal life here in Israel.
I just want to I want to thank you for the question. I think it's a terrific question, and I would like to use it to talk about a trend that we're seeing. One of the most fascinating things I think in political in the political ecosystem, the Israeli political ecosystem today. The ultra-Orthodox have disproportionate power. Usually, in our type of government, in this parliamentary government, the parties that are willing to go with whomever leads the coalition are the strongest. So let's say that you get the mandate to try and form this the government, and you have and you need 61, and you have 55, and I have 6. Even though I have 6, all the power is in my hands right now. Because even though you have 55, you are nothing without me. And historically, the ultra-Orthodox parties in Israel, they merged and they split, and they merged and they split, and now we have 2 strong parties, have historically been those who said, we're going to go with whomever offers more. And with that, they were the strongest parties traditionally. What happened in the past 3 or 4 years, together with a trend, Shaked said, in recent years, we see these liberal parties that come into play. That really started recently, maybe in the 90s, that we started seeing actually Yair Lapid. If you're familiar with current political players in Israel, Yair Lapid is known as one of the harshest critics of the ultra-Orthodox parties. The original protagonist in this issue was Yair Lapid's dad. Yair Lapid's dad was actually, I think, the first, if not one of the first, to heavily criticize the ultra-Orthodox parties. What happened in recent years is that they joined Netanyahu, and they said, regardless of what happens in the elections, we joined the bloc, we're going to go with Netanyahu. I think that is a dire mistake on their part, because now Shaked talked about Yamina and talked about Bennett, talked about all these right-wing parties that now have all the power. The power is not with the ultra-Orthodox anymore. The ultra-Orthodox are aligned with Netanyahu. If Netanyahu falls, they fall with him. And I think that there is no decisive answer to your question, but I think that your question allows us to look at a fascinating trend and something that I think would affect Israeli politics for years to come. I see that Nancy rang the 5-minute bell. So I think that Nancy, do you wanna take over? Should we wrap it up?
So I really, really appreciate the conversation. I think this has been a really magnificent conversation, and I really don't want to make it shorter. So I guess I'd love to ask if people have the time, if there's a burning question, I would love for maybe one more question. And if you have that question, please feel free to unmute yourself and ask, because, and for those of you, let me just say, for those of you who may have kind of a time schedule to keep to and need to leave us, I do want to thank you for joining us. I also want to do a quick shout out to our wonderful co-chairs of Tzahal Shalom, Beth Baer, Dana Roth, and Hope Levinson, who put this whole series together. I'll have more formal closure words later, but for those of you who have to leave us, I completely understand. We will not take it personally, but I would love for folks to have this rare opportunity to ask questions of these incredibly knowledgeable gentlemen. So please stay with us if you would like for a kind of little bit of an after party here. So unmute yourself if you have a question. I'm going to give it kind of another second. I know that there's a lot of thank yous coming your way, you guys. If there aren't any other questions, maybe what I'd love to do is open the floor to Or and Shahed for one more minute to kind of wrap up or say anything you'd like us to know in closure. This has been a magnificent conversation, and I have learned so much and feel so blessed. So let me pass the floor over to you guys again.
Good.
Okay. So first of all, I'd like to thank everyone. And I'll say that I think many issues, we're interested in Israel. You're interested in Israel. I'm very interested in what's going on in the United States. I feel like the Jewish people living in the United States are part of my big family. I truly do. And although I didn't meet anyone in person yet, I truly feel like it's some kind of a big family, and I think it's such an amazing thing for us Jewish people to have this kind of conversation. I don't think a lot of nations and religions in the world are actually capable to have such a great conversation from different continents. And I want to thank all the organizers here and Tzahal Shalom and your amazing community there in Stanford. I think you're doing an amazing work, and you made me feel a part of you, and I sincerely thank you for everything.
Maybe I don't know if you can come. I mean, can you bring Shaked like next time you have a physical delegation?
So that is our hope. If he is available, our hope is that this is just a sneak peek, just a little bit of a preview of the Shahed show, because we would love to have you next spring if you are available. You are absolutely invited to be part of our 2022 delegation. So, but we'll be in touch around that. But Or, you're absolutely right. You know a gem when you see one. So we will take you up on that if your professional career allows.
Absolutely. Check it out. I'd be happy to be your agent.
I would love that. I would love that. Really. Thank
I
you.
just want to tell the folks that we had about 2 months to prepare this evening, and Dana and Nancy contacted us about 2 months in advance. And I told Dana that I didn't even plan my wedding 2 months in advance.
It's
You
so
know,
true.
we planned our wedding like 2.5 weeks before it happened. But we knew back then, we knew that we'd probably have more questions. Like even like as Israelis, we'd have more questions than answers for you guys. There's so much uncertainty. We're in the middle of all this excitement, and to be here and to talk about these trends and to talk about things that would probably unfold in the near future, hopefully, you can only hope. I really do feel very, very grateful and blessed for you guys inviting us. And as we usually say, next year in Jerusalem.
Amen. Amen.
Amen.
Yeah, and I
So
just have to say, I'll just quickly, it's been over a year since I spoke to Shaked for the first time, and I went back to the committee and I said, "Oh my gosh, he's someone special. We have to get him here," right? So I'm so glad that you've stayed in touch and joined our program today, and hopefully we will see you in person next year.
That's
And
right.
or we know you're special. You've been special to our community for many years. So thank you for making this presentation today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. Really, thank you.
And we're excited that I don't know if you said this already, but if you haven't, Or is coming back to Stanford, or he's coming back to the States. He's going to be living in the States come August. So he will not be an unfamiliar face, I hope. He will be a familiar face at the JCC and in the Stanford community, though he won't be living in Stanford. He'll be close enough. So we're thrilled to have him back, and hopefully a part of some programming or possibilities next year as well, especially as we are able to be together in person, God willing. That will be very exciting. So really, the two of you, we thank you so much for sharing your knowledge, your expertise, your all that you bring to the table. We really appreciate it. And again, for those of you who joined us, thank you so much for carving out your Sunday morning, afternoon to be with us. This program is a magnificent testament to the community. This program is completely supported by members of the greater Stanford really community for over 43 years, as I said, based on the sole financial donations and commitment and hard work and energy by our chairs and our committees over all these years. So I do ask, if you are able, it has been a tough year, but if you are able and available to help support this program for the future, we truly appreciate it. We'd love to be able to be in a position to have Shaked and some other folks join us in person and participate and teach our community and grow with our community and be a part of our community. So thank you all, and have a wonderful, wonderful afternoon.